I can't believe it, I'm here. I saw the man who made the whole world laugh the most drown in an ocean of black fire while begging for a single second of mercy that would never be granted to him in the eternity of the abyss. Subscribe to God's Wonders this very instant if you want to protect your family from the false joy this world offers to drag them into the endless torment of damnation. Because what my immaterial eyes beheld in the smoking bowels of the earth will steal your breath and force you to question every hour you spend in front of a screen worshipping mortal human beings. The heat that enveloped me was a living, malicious entity that sought to melt not only my spiritual skin, but every fragment of sanity I had left in my mind. The smell of concentrated sulfur mingled with the stench of millions of rotten hopes, creating an air so heavy and toxic that each breath felt like inhaling shards of boiling glass straight into my lungs. My astral body plummeted through endless tunnels of living rock that throbbed like the heart of a colossal monster, bathed in a suffocating red light that didn't illuminate, but rather revealed pure pain. Dry, inarticulate wails ripped through the air, bouncing off the sharp obsidian walls with a frequency that filled me with utter, paralyzing despair. I felt the invisible weight of millions of gazes filled with eternal hatred, stalking me from the dark crevices, where creatures beyond human comprehension waited patiently to devour my will. The sky above this dimension of suffering was non-existent, replaced by a vault of black clouds and purple lightning that heralded a divine wrath that never fades or wanes. Every second in this place seemed to stretch into a full millennium, forcing me to taste the bitterness of total and definitive separation from the light of the universe's creator. The plains that lay beneath my falling path were not made of earth or sand, but of burning embers and molten glass that creaked with a ghastly sound under the weight of damned souls. Entire rivers of viscous, dark magma snaked across the horizon, carrying the spiritual bodies of those who believed that fame and fortune would shield them from accountability on the final day. Salty beasts of truly gigantic proportions patrolled the dense air, wielding whips, forged with white fire. They used it to relentlessly punish the multitudes who groaned in the pit of despair. The magnitude of the suffering was so mathematically perfect and implacable that I immediately understood there was no error in this place, but a 3-minute justice, so pure that it was absolutely terrifying to any imperfect mind. The feeling of being completely abandoned to the will of eternal punishment is such an immense void that it tears at the very essence of your being, leaving you without a single tear of solace. I am a 55-year-old veteran television producer, and for decades of my life, I was the architect of the fame of dozens of celebrities, crafting idols of clay for the masses to worship blindly. My earthly name is of no importance whatsoever now, because the only thing of incalculable value is the divine warning I have received, the strict order to turn you in today to save your soul. I lived immersed in a world of spotlights, red carpets, and million-dollar contracts, believing with immense arrogance that television success granted me the power of a petty god over the minds of millions of unsuspecting viewers. In the silence of my luxurious office, I mocked those who spoke of the salvation of the soul, considering them inferior beings who needed ancient tales to endure the harshness of the real world. I was the master of entertainment and comedy, selling hollow laughter that numbed people's consciences so they would forget to seek the forgiveness deserved by the one who gave his life on the cross of Calvary. Now, standing on that plain of fire and brimstone, I realized with a leg-paralyzing terror that my entire career had been a death trap designed by the forces of darkness. Guilt fell upon my immaterial shoulders with the force of a million iron mountains. Understanding that my work had distracted countless people from the path of truth, leading them into this abyss of suffering. The panic of knowing that I myself deserved to be submerged in that lake of lava, pressed upon my chest, making me wish I could turn back time to undo every television program and every lie I had helped spread in the world. I felt naked and utterly vulnerable before the overwhelming gaze of a spiritual universe that tolerates no idolatry and forgives no one who steals the glory that belongs solely to the Supreme Creator. I wept with unbearable bitterness, recognizing my own willful blindness and my complicity in the perdition of all those who idolize men and despise divine mercy. Through the thick red smoke rising from the depths of the magma, I began to discern a grotesque and colossal architecture that rose in the center of the Valley of the Shadow. It was a macabre and monumental mockery of an immense television studio built entirely from the charred bones and crushed souls of those who died loving empty entertainment more than their own savior. In the center of that cursed stage, illuminated by spotlights that shot green and poisonous fire, stood a rusted iron throne, surrounded by torture chambers made of obsidian. A human figure was chained to that throne, writhing in slow and constant agony, while millions of demons in the stands mocked, mimicking canned laughter that we used to use on television programs. The scene unfolded with a hypertrophic and sadistic slowness, designed millimeter by millimeter to prolong the man's psychological torment, chained, forcing him to feel every fraction of a second of his endless punishment. The condemned man wore a torn formal suit stained with spiritual blood, the same clothes in which the whole world saw him receive his awards and recognitions at the most prestigious ceremonies on the planet. The crushing weight of worldwide fame and the laughter he provoked on earth had now materialized into heavy chains of liquid fire that burned his immaterial skin to the bone without ever consuming him. With an agonizing and trembling effort, the figure turned his face, disfigured by unbearable pain, toward the black glass shelf, where I was hiding and paralyzed by the deepest astonishment. His eyes, which for years had shone with the charisma and joy that captivated entire nations, were now empty sockets from which thick tears of boiling lava flowed, melting his very jaw. When the infernal light finally illuminated his features, my spiritual heart stopped abruptly as I realized I was looking before the most beloved and famous television comedian of our generation, the man who had made millions forget their sorrows, the king of comedy, who had absolutely everything in the physical world. Boundless fame and the unconditional love of the public, was now the most miserable creature in the universe. The colossal lie of earthly success shattered before my eyes as I confirmed that all his talent, his jokes, and his fortune couldn't buy him even an inch of compassion before the tribunal of eternal justice. Meanwhile, on Earth, thousands of fans continued to mourn his passing and watch reruns of his shows with laughter and applause. Her soul cries out desperately in this well of darkness, begging for a drop of water that will never come. I fell to my knees on the molten glass floor, feeling how real God's judgment against false idolatry is, perfect and infinitely terrifying for those who choose to ignore it during their borrowed years. The comedian extended one of his charred hands toward me in a heart-wrenching gesture of supplication, trying to convey a message with an effort that rattled his very spiritual bones. He attempted to open his burned mouth to utter words of warning, but from his shattered throat sprang only a torrent of liquid fire and a shriek so terrifyingly high-pitched that it echoed in every dark corner of that cursed Colosseum. The echo of that dreadful shriek that erupted from the comedian's shattered throat, it ricocheted off the walls of the colossal television studio of bones with a destructive force that nearly ripped my spirit from its anchor. The stands of that structure were filled with millions of grotesque shadows that never stopped applauding and emitting canned laughter that sounded like razor-sharp blades, slicing through the thick, poisonous air of the deep abyss. The smell of burnt vanity and putrid, false joy was so the air was so suffocating that my immaterial lungs contracted in violent spasms of pure revulsion. Cascades of a black, viscous liquid, resembling the melted makeup of 1,000 sad clowns, rained down from the obsidian spotlights, splattering the face of the man who had once been the undisputed king of world comedy. Dark lightning bolts streaked across the apocalyptic red sky, illuminating every wound on his soul, revealing the eternal price of having traded the glory of the Creator, from the fleeting laughter of a blind, mortal audience. The ground around me began to tremble with a rhythmic, terrifying vibration, mimicking the drums of the big bands that used to accompany his primetime talk shows. But here, in the bowels of damnation, each drum beat was actually the impact of a red-hot iron hammer on the spiritual bones of thousands of souls chained to his legacy of superficial entertainment. The flames surrounding the comedian's rusty iron throne shifted color, from a raging orange to a sickly, toxic green, each time a demon reminded him of the millions of dollars he earned, while my spirit was dying of hunger and thirst. The very air was charged with a malevolent electricity that made every hair on my head stand on end, forcing me to keep my eyes wide open to witness divine justice in its rawest and the most perfect form. No comedy mask or makeup can survive in this place of torment, because the eternal fire has the relentless purpose of burning away all the lies we use on earth until only the naked truth remains. I watched with paralyzing terror as the chains that bound the hands and feet of the television idol were not made of ordinary iron, but of the millions of empty applauses and smiles he received during his earthly life. Each link bore the face of a fanatic who had placed his faith and time in it instead of seeking eternal salvation, and now those links were heating up until they turned white with fire, melting his immaterial flesh. The demons guarding him had no fixed faces, their countenances constantly shifted, displaying the expressions of the television executives, sponsors, and sycophants who had pushed him toward his own doom. These immense, scaly, red-skinned beasts cackled with voices that sounded like the crackling of mountains of shattered glass, mocking his former crown of earthly glory, which was now his worst and heaviest punishment. The temperature in that corner of the abyss was so incomprehensibly high that I felt my own smart producer's suit grow heavy and suffocating, reminding me of my deep complicity in this system of global idolatry. Listen very carefully to what I am about to reveal to you, for this truth may be the only lifeline, salvation for your own life and that of your family in the midst of a world drowning in entertainment. The landscape around us distorted for a few seconds, as if hell itself were breathing and gathering strength to show me an even deeper layer of suffering reserved for humanity's false gods. From the boiling lava lake surrounding the studio, monstrous forms began to emerge, resembling gigantic theatrical masks of comedy and tragedy. Deformed by pain and decay, dripping green acid, the sound of acid corroding the hopes of those condemned mingled with the incessant wailing of the chained man, forming a symphony of despair that would scar your soul for all eternity if you could hear it for even a second. The darkness in this place wasn't the absence of light, but a thick, sentient substance that clung to the skin and penetrated the mind to extinguish any glimmer of happy memories the comedian might have retained. The columns of toxic smoke rising from the nearby pits took the form of gigantic hands, pointing accusingly at the man on the iron throne, blaming him for leading them down the broad path of perdition through easy laughter. Each time one of those smoky hands touched the television idol's face, his expression contorted into a grimace of such extreme agony that my own muscles tensed to the point of tearing with sheer human empathy. The winged beasts hovering above the scene dropped comedy scripts made of burning embers that pierced the condemned man's chest, searching for the place where a heart once beat with pride and extreme vanity. The rumble of subterranean thunder heralded the arrival of an even greater punishment and forced me to cling to the black crystal rocks to avoid falling myself into that pit of madness and endless suffering. I urge you not to turn your mind away from this tale, for what you are about to discover about celestial justice will change the way you see every comedy show and every large gathering. While my eyes could not tear themselves away from the endless torture of that man whom I had so often embraced in the hallways of the world's most important television networks, my own conscience began to torment me from within. I remembered with a remorse that tore my soul into 1,000 pieces, every time I, as an executive producer, manipulated the emotions of millions through a glittering screen to generate massive audiences. I was a vital part of the same machinery of lies that manufactured idols of clay so that the masses would have something to laugh about on weekends, completely forgetting their creator and the health of their immortal souls. I realized in that instant of terrifying clarity that my elegant hands were also stained with the spiritual blood of those men I helped feel like unattainable demigods of the small screen. The weight of my own pride fell upon my shoulders with the force of a leaden mountain as I understood that my entire career and international awards were utter garbage before the majesty and implacable judgment of God. How immense and foolish was my pride to think I could prolong the careers of these artists and guarantee their earthly glory when their eternal destiny hung by a thread so thin and brittle that any divine breath could sever it without warning. The tears that now rolled down my cheeks were not only from the horror of seeing the comedian burn in the fire, but from the agonizing panic of knowing that my own name might well be written on the burning stones of this very valley of death. I wondered with a breath-snapping anguish how many of those talented young men I had launched to fame were now in some corner of this hell, cursing those who deified them and never spoke to them of repentance. Fame is such a sweet and deceptive poison that it numbs your senses and makes you believe that the rules of the universe do not apply to you, until you abruptly awaken at the bottom of the abyss, surrounded by beasts who mock your trophies. My heart pounded as I realized that I myself had applauded this man's excesses, justifying them as the eccentricities of a comedic genius, instead of seeing them as the mortal sins they were. The silence in my own soul was deafening despite the infernal din surrounding me, because I had no excuse to offer before the heavenly court of justice for my willful blindness and my complicity in idolatry. I felt as if a spotlight of divine light was opening my darkest thoughts and revealing every moment I prioritized professional prestige and multi-million-dollar contracts over truth and spiritual integrity. Don't let go of this testimony for anything in the world, because the horror of recognizing your own misery before the mirror of eternity is a pain I want to spare you at all costs by sharing this warning that was given to me. I, who always prided myself on having quick answers and perfect scripts for any situation, now found myself completely speechless and paralyzed by a spiritual pain that no human comedy could ever alleviate. The terror of being judged by the same rod of perfect justice made me tremble so much that I could barely stand on the cliff of molten glass from where I watched the punishment of the fallen idol. How could I have been so foolish as to believe that the laughter of the crowds could fill the infinite void of the human heart, which was only designed to be inhabited by the very presence of the supreme creator of the universe? It disgusted me to remember the times I celebrated high ratings as if they were eternal triumphs, toasting with champagne while millions of people around the world died without knowing Christ's mercy and forgiveness in this place of fire and brimstone. Academy Awards don't matter. Bank accounts overflowing with millions don't matter, nor do golden magazine covers, because all of that becomes the fuel for your torment. Vanity is an invisible chain we weave ourselves on earth, and in hell it materializes as a red-hot iron shackle that drags you into the depths of absolute and irrevocable despair. My mind screamed for mercy, not only for the tortured man before me, but for my own sick soul, begging for a second chance to return to earth and shout this terrifying truth to the four winds. Suddenly, the frenetic rhythm of the torture in the colossal studio seemed to stop for a microsecond, and time itself began to flow with a hypertrophic, agonizing slowness that allowed me to observe every microscopic detail in slow motion. One of the greater demons, a beast of colossal proportions with obsidian scales and bat wings dripping magma, slowly approached the Iron Throne, holding a terrifying object in its immense claws. As the beast moved its arms with terrifying deliberation, I could make out that the object was a demonic parody of a microphone made of solid gold, but encrusted with red-hot blades and fragments of souls shattered by despair. The demon broke into a macabre smile that revealed rows of fangs like rusty swords, and with an extremely slow and calculated movement, forced the comedian to take the microphone burned hot with his bare, charred hands. Every second of that delivery seemed to last an eternity, and the sound of the immaterial flesh burning against the cursed gold generated a shockwave of pain that brought me to my knees. The voice of the great demon echoed throughout the valley like subterranean thunder, dragging out the words with a chilling slowness that made even the immaterial blood run cold, ordering the damned man to tell one more joke for the audience if he wanted a second of relief. The television idol, his eyes bulging with panic and utter despair, mustered all the remaining strength in his shattered spirit and brought the razor-sharp microphone to his bleeding lips. The action unfolded so slowly that he could see the immaterial fibers of his muscles tensing and tearing with the superhuman effort of obeying the torturer's command under the mocking gaze of millions. When he finally tried to utter a word to make his tormentors laugh, there was no sound of applause, no genuine laughter in the infernal studio, but the repulsive crackling of his own will, splintering into 1,000 pieces simultaneously. The microphone heated up until it emitted a blinding light, for it weighed as much as the sum of all the world's idolatry. which this man had arrogantly accepted during his fleeting and miserable life on earth. A scream of absolute and pure pain escaped the man's cracked lips, as his hands slowly disintegrated, turning into coal dust and glittering ash were carried by the poisonous wind from the deep abyss. But the torture in this place knows neither end nor compassionate respite, for immediately after the destruction, a black, pulsating light enveloped his smoldering stumps and began to regenerate his limbs. With cruel slowness, the spiritual nerves were woven one by one, mingling with the burning thorns of the throne, forcing him to feel the pain of healing, which was even worse than the pain of mutilation he had just suffered under the mockery of the beasts. The chief demon let out a cackle that shook the foundations of the studio and with his fiery whip forced the comedian to prepare to take the microphone again, restarting the macabre cycle of false hope and utter destruction. My tears fell upon the black rock as I watched the talent I myself had exploited on television now become the primary instrument of this poor wretch's eternal humiliation. Don't miss a single detail of this astonishing revelation, because every word is a shield for your soul against the deceptions of this fleeting world that worships cheap comedy and despises the eternal spirit of salvation. The idol extended its newly formed hands again, and the horror repeated itself with the same agonizing slowness, ensuring that his mind would not have a single moment of peace to assimilate the continuous and cyclical torment that awaited him for centuries. The demonic crowds in the stands raised banners made of burnt human skin, honoring this man, the king of laughter and the icon of a generation. Each time they read those headlines aloud, the letters ignited and flew like fiery arrows to pierce the condemned man's ears, burning his hearing but not quite destroying it so he could still hear. Earthly vanity is the greatest and the most dangerous fraud devised by the forces of darkness to steal your salvation and deliver you bound hand and foot to the executioners of the dark pit. Just as his hands were smashed for the third time against the immovable microphone of gold and blades, the beloved comedian raised his disfigured face and his empty eyes met mine across the vastness. The impact of his gaze was like a scream of absolute and pure pain escaped the man's cracked lips as his hands slowly disintegrated, turning into coal dust and glowing ash, which was carried away by the poisonous wind from the deep abyss. But the torture in this place knows neither end nor compassionate rest, for immediately after the destruction, a black, pulsating light enveloped his smoking stumps and began to regenerate the limbs with cruel slowness. The spiritual nerves were woven one by one, mingling with the burning thorns of the throne, forcing him to feel the pain of healing, which was even worse than the pain of mutilation he had just suffered under the mockery of the beasts. The elder demon let out a laugh that shook the foundations of the studio and with his fiery whip forced the comedian to prepare to take the microphone again, restarting the macabre cycle of false hope and total destruction. My tears fell upon the black rock as I watched the talent I myself had exploited on television now become the primary instrument of this poor wretch's eternal humiliation. Do not miss a single detail of this astonishing revelation, for every word is a shield for your soul against the deceptions of this fleeting world that worships cheap comedy and despises the eternal spirit of salvation. The idol once again extended its newly formed hands, and the horror repeated itself with the same agonizing slowness, ensuring that his mind would not have a single moment of peace to assimilate the continuous and cyclical torment that awaited him for centuries. The demonic crowds in the stands raised banners made of burnt human skin, honoring this man, the king of laughter and the icon of a generation. Each time they read those headlines aloud, the letters ignited and flew like fiery arrows to pierce the condemned man's ears, burning his hearing but not quite destroying it so he could still hear. Earthly vanity is the greatest and the most dangerous fraud devised by the forces of darkness to steal your salvation and deliver you bound hand and foot to the executioners of the dark pit. Just as his hands were smashed for the third time against the immovable microphone of gold and blades, the beloved comedian raised his disfigured face and his empty eyes met mine across the vastness. The impact of his gaze was like I received a physical blow to the center of my chest that left me breathless and filled me with a cosmic terror that nearly ripped my soul from my immaterial body, projected into that inferno of black fire. Through that terrifying connection, I could feel the full weight of his belated regret and his unfathomable despair upon realizing there was absolutely nothing he could do to change his fate, already sealed for eternity. He begged me with his eyes to return to the world of the living and warn his former castmates, his millionaire producers, and the millions of families who watched him every night, pleading with them not to follow in his footsteps. The level of anguish he transmitted to me in that millisecond of visual connection was so crushing that I felt my own mind would shatter into pieces, leaving me in a state of irreversible madness before the law. He made a superhuman and agonizing effort to open his mouth and try to articulate a clear warning to me, forcing his burned vocal cords beyond any conceivable limit for a spiritual being subjected to such torture, but as divine punishment for having used his voice on earth to promote vulgar jokes, mockery of the sacred, and pride. Instead of giving glory to his Creator from his throat, not a single intelligible word came out. Instead, a thick, violent jet of boiling acid erupted from his mouth, cascading down his chest and scorching the fabric of his formal attire, where the medallion the crowds blindly worshipped still gleamed. The sound of his stifled gurgles and desperate attempts to speak as he choked on the liquid fire is a sound seared into my nightmares, haunting me every time I close my eyes seeking rest. The stark reality that millions of people on Earth are at this very moment laughing at his videos while he drowns in eternal flames. The saddest and the most terrifying paradox of human existence, the greater demon, realizing the visual connection between the condemned man and me, turned his immense and hideous head toward where I was hiding atop the shimmering black crystal cliff overlooking the valley. His eyes were two pools of pure darkness that seemed to absorb all the scant light in the room, and his wicked smile made me understand that he knew perfectly well who I was and what the hidden sins of my own professional life were. He raised his fiery whip with a defiant slowness. The gravity pointed directly at my spiritual heart, while a voice that sounded like the clash of 1,000 rusty swords resonated inside my mind, warning me that my turn was near. The purest, most primal panic a human being can experience seized every fiber of my being as I realized that the temporary immunity I enjoyed as a mere observer on this journey was about to vanish. I felt the rocks beneath my Italian designer shoes begin to crack and slowly melt, threatening to hurl me straight into the same pit where the chained souls and the comedian were being tortured. But what I saw happen right after the threat of that colossal beast is something that will paralyze your heart and prove to you that the power of idolatry is a monster that feeds on our own spiritual blindness. So don't you dare leave. An earthquake of epic proportions shook the entire Bone studio, causing cascades of viscous blood to freeze in midair, while a colossal rift opened in the very center of the fiery plain, splitting the landscape of torment. From the depths of that new rift, a presence so terrifying and ancient began to emerge. Even the torturous demons themselves fell to their knees, trembling with fear, and cracked their whips upon the lava. The heat in the air intensified 1,000-fold, instantly drying my tears of terror and threatening to disintegrate my astral body before I could hear the final message that had led me to this forgotten corner. The true architect of all the world's entertainment idolatry was about to reveal himself before my bulging eyes, and I assure you, he will change your faith forever. The deafening sound that erupted from the bowels of that new and colossal fissure in the Valley of Fire was so immensely disturbing that it surpassed the collapse of 1,000 televisions simultaneously exploding inside my head. A dark, suffocating light began to radiate from the depths of the abyss, tinging the thick red smoke with a sickly purple hue that caused uncontrollable spiritual nausea and blood-curdling fear. The ambient heat, which was already an absolutely indescribable torture, multiplied in such a way that I felt as if the immaterial fibers of my own being began to evaporate under my dark suit of high-level producer. The immense black obsidian boulders around me creaked and shattered into thousands of razor-sharp fragments from the immense pressure of an ancient, malevolent energy that consumed everything with an insatiable thirst. Every corner of that monstrous studio of human bones vibrated with a frequency of pure terror that forced all the beasts to hide their disgusting faces against the boiling floor. The smell of ancient decay and cosmic rebellion flooded my immaterial lungs, drowning me in a sea of despair so profound that I completely forgot the scripts, the cameras, and the recording studios of my earthly life. It was a stench that didn't come from burning human flesh, but from the very essence of pure evil, concentrated for countless millennia in the most absolute and distant darkness of the universe of shadows. The rivers of viscous, dark magma ceased their course completely, frozen in time before the imposing presence that slowly ascended from the unexplored depths of the apocalyptic fissure that split hell. The souls chained along the plane of molten crystal stopped screaming and began to moan in a low, unison tone that chilled the blood, transmitting a panic 1,000 times greater than the physical pain they already suffered. The entire atmosphere grew heavy, like a mountain of lead, crushing my will and forcing me to dig my immaculate hands into the edge of the rock to keep from falling to my knees. From the unfathomable blackness of the geological fault, a gigantic crown emerged first, forged from corrupted gold and adorned with jewels that resembled living camera lenses, weeping tears of thick black blood that stained the void. The size of this malevolent entity defied all human logic, towering above the cursed Colosseum like a tower of false majesty, casting shadows of utter terror upon the millions of damned souls who had once loved the world. Its body was enveloped in a mantle of deceptive light that constantly shifted shape, mimicking the flashes of camera flashes and the blinding spotlights of show business's red carpets. It did not walk on boiling lava, but levitated majestically, trailing a trail of grey ash that devoured any spark of hope that might remain in their hearts, the withered souls of those who worshipped him. The sepulchral silence that reigned in hell. At that moment, it was so overwhelming that I could hear the frantic beating of my own spiritual heart, resonating like a death sentence announcing my own imminent end. The face of this Prince of Darkness on the screen was a vision so horrifying and fascinating at the same time that it almost ripped away what little sanity I had left in a single blow. As I tried to comprehend his true and twisted nature, he didn't have a fixed face, rather, his countenance was a liquid and macabre mirror, reflecting at dizzying speed the faces of all the great idols worshipped by fragile humanity throughout the history of television and film, and in fractions of a second, the faces of famous presenters, idolized actors, and the most well-known comedians on the planet flashed by, including the man who was chained up before me. The immense beast literally fed on the blind devotion that human beings lavish upon these clay figures, absorbing every clap, every laugh of admiration, and every sigh of earthly adoration. I understood with paralyzing horror that when crowds laugh and applaud the name of a celebrity on earth, they are actually paying direct homage to this colossal monster that hides behind the curtain of global entertainment. The majesty of this demonic being made me understand the true magnitude of the deception in which I had lived immersed for my 55 years in the world of the living, walking like a blind man, leading other blind men toward the spiritual slaughterhouse. My knees trembled uncontrollably on the black crystal cliff as I watched the entity extend its enormous arms, ending in razor-sharp claws, enveloped in toxic smoke and a bright green poison. Each time it moved its immense hands, shockwaves rippled through the thick air, knocking down lesser demons and causing the massive bone pillars of the gigantic infernal studio to creak and groan, threatening to bring it crashing down. The purple light emanating from its corrupted crown illuminated the darkest corners of the vast valley, revealing thousands of hidden prisons where millions of forgotten souls suffered unimaginable torments for having chosen the farce of men. The supernatural cold that accompanied this supreme figure contrasted horribly with the immense heat of the lava, creating storms of black ice and red fire that mercilessly lashed out at the multitudes of the damned. I recalled with a pang of guilt that almost shattered my soul into 1,000 pieces all those afternoons in my luxurious production office where I manipulated scripts and the emotions of the public to turn them into screen addicts. I was a fundamental and extremely proud cog in this immense machine of deception that manufactured false gods so that the masses would have someone to pray to on weekends in front of the television. My heart twisted with disgust as I realized that my programs weren't bringing joy to lives, but were instead paving the way to this abyss of suffering for millions who blindly trusted my supposed creative genius. How could I have been so arrogant and conceited as to think that my industry awards and ratings records exempted me from accountability to the absolute creator of the universe, who observes every hidden intention deep within our minds? The weight of my complicity in the downfall of so many innocent souls fell upon my immaterial back, crushing me against the cold obsidian and making me sob like a helpless child abandoned in eternal darkness. I understood in that instant of terrifying and purifying clarity that the immense theaters and recording studios we build on earth are not mere venues for art, but rather modern-day temples of pagan worship, specifically designed to steal God's glory. Every unified laugh that echoes through the stands when a comedian tells a vulgar joke is actually a dark prayer that feeds the power of the colossal beast that now levitates majestically above the lake of fire. We human beings, with our immense thirst for distraction, willingly surrender ourselves as spiritual slaves to a system designed by the forces of darkness, to keep us anesthetized and far from true salvation. Terror gripped me when I thought of my own family, my children and grandchildren, who were surely at this very moment watching some mindless program and laughing in front of an altar of bright pixels, oblivious to the mortal danger, the helplessness of not being able to shout to them from this prison of eternal fire to turn off that screen and seek divine forgiveness. It was a psychological torment far worse than the physical pain caused by the suffocating heat of the deep abyss. All my supposed earthly triumphs, all the bank accounts overflowing with money and the public accolades I had collected with such greed for decades, were revealed to my spiritual eyes as a pile of toxic and useless garbage. The success that the world so applauds and desperately pursues is merely a cruel and merciless mirage that vanishes into thin air the very second we exhale our last breath and cross the threshold into unchanging eternity. I realized with profound terror that no amount of earthly wealth could bribe the torturous demons, nor buy a single milliliter of fresh water to quench the endless thirst that tortured my immaterial throat in that place of absolute torment. Heavenly justice is so perfectly balanced and so relentlessly pure that it leaves not the slightest opening for cheap excuses or human justifications that we in the industry so often use to lull our consciences, anesthetized by continual sin. My own soul was naked and completely exposed before the overwhelming gaze of a spiritual universe that does not tolerate lies and punishes idolatry with a severity that 51 verse 56 it defies all human imagination. Pay close attention to what this primeval beast did next, and engrave these words deep within your heart, for they will reveal the macabre fate that awaits your idols and yourself. If you don't change course today, the immense and terrifying entity began to slowly glide across the burning magma, directing its absolute and perverse attention toward the rusted iron throne, where the television idol remained chained and weeping tears of molten lava. The hyper-slow motion of this dimension of suffering forced me to watch as the grey ashes following the entity clung to the doomed man's tattered formal attire, burning away his immaterial skin with meticulous and sadistic slowness. The millions of lesser demons in the stands of the Bone Studio maintained a silence so dense and absolute that the crackling of the flames and the gurgling of the boiling acid echoed like deafening thunder amidst this palpable nightmare. The air became so thick and charged with malice that every breath I took felt like inhaling shards of ground glass directly into my tormented chest. As I clung to the edge of the abyss with all my might, the beloved comedian, realizing the imposing presence approaching his throne of torture, raised his disfigured face, and his empty eye sockets seemed to fill with a completely new panic, 1,000 times more destructive than before. His immaterial body, already shattered by countless punishments, began to tremble with such violence that the heavy chains of empty applause that bound him began to clang against the red-hot iron, creating a discordant and mournful melody. The colossal beast stopped right in front of him, completely blocking any glimpse of the red light from the apocalyptic sky and plunging the man into darkness. A chilling, absolute force penetrated to the very depths of his withered spiritual essence. The mirror-like face of the supreme demon stopped its rapid rotation and fixed upon the exact image of the comedian himself at the pinnacle of his earthly career, when he held a gold award before thousands of cameras and frenzied crowds. The irony of seeing his own past glory reflected in the face of the entity, which now came to claim eternal payment for that idolatry. It was such a brutal blow that the chained man let out a guttural howl that made my ears bleed. The supreme entity of entertainment did not utter a single intelligible word, but his voice resonated in my mind and in the minds of all those present, like a rock slide, crushing a valley of crystal, warning of the imminent collection of the debt. He raised one of his colossal arms and extended a bony hand covered in obsidian scales toward the bare and smoking chest of the ancient god of the screens, who was now writhing, trying in vain to escape the shackles. The beast's immense claws did not tear the man's immaterial flesh, but gently penetrated the center of his chest, as if his body were a mere shadow, passing directly to the core of his soul, stained by vanity. The polar cold emanating from the demonic hand collided violently with the extreme heat of the tortured body, creating clouds of bloody vapor that enveloped the scene in a dense, repulsive fog that reeked of falsehood and lost opportunities. My bulging eyes could not tear themselves away from the ghastly spiritual intervention taking place before me, cruelly reminding me how industry squeezes talent dry, leaving only empty shells with a slowness that defied reason and prolonged suffering, to the point of being unspeakable. The supreme demon began to extract a golden, glittering smoke from within the condemned man's soul, pulling at the substance with visible effort. That golden, corrupt light was nothing other than all the worship, all the fame, all the applause, and every condescending laugh the comedian had stolen from the hands of God during his fleeting existence in the world of the living. As the entity ripped away that earthly glory, the artist's body withered and compressed upon itself, losing any trace of human form and becoming an empty, pathetic shell of concentrated pain. The uninterrupted shriek escaping his ragged throat wasn't from physical pain, but from the sheer terror of losing the only thing that gave him identity. Having built his entire existence on the fragile and useless foundation of worldwide fame, the beast inhaled deeply the golden smoke through its dark nostrils, and its camera lens eyes glowed with a blinding intensity, feeding directly on human pride and becoming even more immense and terrifying. But divine punishment for false idolatry does not end with the mere theft of glory. It requires physical and spiritual retribution, returning each sin multiplied millions of times over in forms of utterly macabre and terrifying torment. The remnants of golden smoke that lingered in the poisonous air suddenly began to materialize and rapidly transform into all the immense trophies, medals, and gold statuettes this man had won in his earthly career. For a fleeting moment, these objects shone with the same deceptive light they possess in earthly display cases, but immediately this optical illusion shattered, and the trophies transformed into mechanical spiders of molten metal and obsidian scorpions. Thousands of these hideous creatures and reptiles rained down upon the withered, chained body of the idol, sinking their burning fangs and venomous stings into every inch of his exposed, immaterial skin. The poison they injected did not kill the condemned man. Instead, it ignited his nerves with a pulsating green flame that made him feel the simultaneous pain of every broken bone and every disease in the world amplified to infinity. The colossal demon with the mirror-like face, still reflecting the former glory of the tortured man, let out a deep, guttural laugh that sounded not of joy but of the continents creaking, splitting in two under the weight of an inescapable judgment. That malignant and all-powerful laugh generated an immense, visible sound wave that swept across the boiling lava plain, raising tsunamis of dark fire and violently crashing them against the unstable foundations of the gigantic study of human bones. The expansive force of that cursed sound struck the black crystal cliff face where I clung, trying to remain unnoticed, like a mere terrified spectator of the macabre play of the deepest hell. The impact was so devastating that my immaterial ears exploded in a painful, deafening ringing that made me release my hands for a fatal microsecond, losing the firm grip that kept me safe from the imminent fall, and with absolute panic, as the perfectly polished surface of the black crystal beneath my immaculate shoes began to crack in 1,000 directions, creating a network of glittering fissures from which boiling lava oozed from the depths. The purest and most uncontrollable terror I have ever experienced seized every corner of my mind as I realized that the cliff was rapidly crumbling and there was absolutely nothing I could hold on to in that void. A gigantic block of razor-sharp rock broke away right beneath my feet with a dull thud and deafening, sending me tumbling backward down the steep, unstable slope, which led directly to the valley of torment and endless despair. I began to slide at breakneck speed down the obsidian slope, uselessly scraping my nails against the smooth stone, trying to slow my descent into the lake of fire, where the torturous demons awaited me with open arms. The scorching heat rose toward me like an invisible beast, scorching the air around me and threatening to set the fabric ablaze. My elegant suit fell away, my breath catching from the brutal force of the free fall toward damnation. I felt every hidden sin of my life, every manipulative script, and every act of pride weigh on my immaterial body like lead anvils, accelerating my descent to the exact center of the Colosseum, where the Supreme Beast waited patiently as I slid down the slope of death, unable to stop my fall, despite my desperate cries, begging for mercy from the apocalyptic red sky. The immense entity of idolatry slowly turned its shifting face in my direction. Time seemed to stop completely once more, leaving me suspended in the air, a few meters from the ground, boiling, facing the direct gaze of the source of all the false worship in the universe and the cause of the perdition of thousands of souls. The macabre mirror of its face ceased reflecting the faces of celebrities and slowly began to form an image that froze my blood, revealing the aged and sweaty features of my own terrified face reflected in the monster. It was showing that my professional pride and my love of ratings and prestige had turned me into a false idol to myself, and that my own vanity had dragged me into the gaping maw of this dimension of pure punishment. The beast's immense mouth opened wildly, revealing a tunnel of absolute and unfathomable emptiness that absorbed what little light remained, preparing to devour my soul completely in an instant of terrifying and irrevocable darkness. The scorching wind from the deep abyss lashed my face with the force of 1,000 fiery hurricanes as I fell hopelessly into the gaping maw of the colossal beast. Every second of that eternal fall seemed to stretch into an entire century of pure agony, where my immaterial senses were bombarded by the stench of concentrated sulfur and rotten earthly promises. The heat was so intense and suffocating that I could feel the fibers of my dark producer's suit slowly disintegrating, turning into glowing ash that left a trail of humiliation in my wake. The screams of agony from the millions of condemned drowning in the boiling lake rose toward me like a symphony of utter terror, trying to drag me into madness. My wild eyes could barely process the immense landscape of torment unfolding beneath my spiritual feet, where entire seas of viscous magma throbbed with a macabre and terrifying rhythm. The darkness emanating from the unfathomable throat of the supreme demon was not a mere absence of light, but a physical and poisonous presence that coiled around my neck, slowly suffocating me. I could taste on my spiritual tongue the metallic tang of clotted blood and the bitter flavor of utter despair that permeated every inch of this dimension of perfect punishment. Echoes of cavernous, sadistic laughter from lesser demons rebounded off the walls of the television studio made of human bones, creating a roar that threatened to burst my eardrums and shatter my mind. Thousands of mechanical golden spiders and obsidian scorpions flew around me, raining down on the idol of comedy chained to the rusted iron throne. Each gust of infernal wind brought with me the lament of souls who cursed the day they were born and the exact moment they decided to ignore the voice of divine conscience, in exchange for a minute of fame. The gigantic Colosseum of perdition seemed to grow and expand as my astral body approached its nerve center, revealing architectural details forged with an ancient and incomprehensible hatred. The spinal columns of unknown giants served as pillars to support the stance, where the shadows drained the little blood that remained in my spirit. I felt an oppression in my chest so immense and crushing as if the entire Andes mountain range had been placed upon my ribs, preventing me from taking a single breath of relief amidst the chaos. The storms of black ice and red fire unleashed by the supreme entity collided, creating lightning bolts of corrupt energy that illuminated my fall with flashes of a sickly purple. It was an environment designed with a perverse, mathematical intelligence solely to strip humanity of any trace of dignity and reduce it to a mere scream of eternal pain. Without cameras or makeup, The vastness of the lake of fire opened beneath me like the mouth of a hungry lion waiting to devour its prey, while colossal bubbles of boiling acid erupted on the surface, the smell of burnt vanity emanating from the glory stolen from the television comedian mingled with the stench of my own intellectual arrogance, creating an atmospheric poison that completely paralyzed me. There was nowhere to look that wasn't saturated with extreme suffering and a cruelty so refined it could only have come from the darkest and the most rebellious minds in the entire universe. The constant whirring of millions of leathery wings beating through the thick, poisonous air echoed in my head like red-hot steel drill, piercing straight to the core of my memories. Every pore of my immaterial being sweated a cold, sticky terror as I realized that this landscape of utter desolation and endless torment was about to become my only home for all eternity, with no possibility of escape. The cracks in the molten glass that stretched across the vast plain resembled the throbbing veins of a gigantic, malignant organism feeding on the collective suffering of fallen humanity. The fiery whips of torturing demons cracked in the air, leaving trails of orange light that blinded my eyes and intensified my uncontrollable vertigo as infernal gravity pulled me down. The temperature fluctuated wildly between a polar cold that crystallized my tears before they fell and a volcanic heat that melted my hopes, leaving my soul in a state of permanent shock. I could hear the gnashing of teeth of the damned, a macabre symphony of belated regret rising from the dark pits, trying in vain to warn me of the eternity of pain. In that atmosphere saturated with pure hatred, it screamed at me that I was completely alone, abandoned to the mercy of the perfect and implacable justice that I myself had brought about with my life of idolatry and media manipulation. While the scorching wind tore at my spiritual face, my mind began to project at breakneck speed all the images of my earthly life that had led me directly to this precipice of damnation. I remembered my luxurious production office on Earth, my awards hanging on fine wood walls, and the arrogance with which I walked the halls of television stations, believing myself to be a king, untouchable. What immense and monumental stupidity it was to dedicate my 55 years of existence to fabricating entertaining lies for mortal men, while my own soul rotted in greed and utter selfishness. The true salvation my spirit needed was sincere repentance and profound humility, but I preferred to intoxicate myself with the recognition of the entertainment press and the million-dollar checks from corporate sponsors. I realized with a pain surpassing any physical burn that I myself had built every rung of the ladder that brought me to this abyss of fire and unfathomable despair. Worshipping ratings, the faces of my wife and children appeared in my memory like a flash of pure light that was immediately devoured by the crushing and poisonous darkness of my own irreparable guilt. I thought of all the family dinners I skipped to cater to some capricious actor or comedian, exchanging the true love of my home for the false worship of a studio full of blind fans. My tears flowed like rivers of bitterness as I realized that my children were probably following my same example of materialism and estrangement from God, walking straight toward this same sea of eternal suffering. The thought of seeing my own blood burn in these same flames because of my lack of spiritual leadership and my cowardice in not speaking the truth to them broke my heart into 1,000 bleeding pieces. Remorse is truly the worm that never dies in hell, devouring your immaterial entrails with every memory of the opportunities for salvation you scorned out of pride and extreme vanity before the cameras. I felt a deep and nauseating disgust toward myself as I recognized that all my intelligence and marketing strategies were absolutely useless in the face of the immensity of heavenly judgment. What good did it do me to know every secret of television and every trick for manipulating the public's emotions? If I was completely ignorant of the spiritual laws that govern the eternal destiny of the entire universe, I felt like a fool who built a sandcastle on the seashore, just before a hurricane, believing that my fleeting fame and money would protect me from the perfect and just wrath of the Supreme Creator. The nakedness of my soul before this crushing reality produced such cosmic and paralyzing shame that I ardently wished the lava would consume me completely so that I would cease to exist and to feel. But in this place of absolute torment, annihilation is not a permissible option, because the price for sin demands a full and awakened conscience to suffer every second of eternity consciously, without a single commercial break in the depths of my being. I tried to formulate an excuse, a creative argument, or an intellectual justification for my behavior on earth, but my own conscience immediately struck me with a blow of truth. I knew perfectly well that I had heard the message of salvation many times in my life, that humble people had tried to warn me, and that I had secretly mocked them, considering the fanatics ignorant. Intellectual pride is the most subtle and destructive poison that the enemy of souls injects into the minds of successful professionals, making them believe they don't need divine forgiveness until it's too late. Now I found myself falling into the jaws of a colossal monster, mentally begging for a single second of the mercy I had so often rejected when comfortably seated in my director's chair. My spirit groaned in silent, inexpressible agony, acknowledging that my sentence was absolutely just and that I did not deserve a single drop of compassion for having so arrogantly trampled on God's grace in the world of show business. A heartrending, piercing scream erupted from the very core of my broken will, a silent plea, yet charged with the force of 1,000,000 desperate souls, directed toward the Creator I had ignored and scorned. I wasn't asking to be saved from punishment, for I knew I richly deserved it. But rather I cried out with all my spiritual strength that my family would not fall into this same place of torment and perpetual darkness. The inattention between my overwhelming guilt and my desperate love for my loved ones generated a spark of pain so pure and genuine that it seemed to illuminate, for a fraction of a second, the interior of my mind, darkened by the false charade. I realized that my only hope amidst the free fall toward spiritual annihilation lay not in my own strength or influential contacts, but in a mercy that surpasses all human understanding. Total panic gave way for a microsecond to absolute and terrifying submission, where my soul surrendered completely, accepting the overwhelming weight of its own wickedness in the face of the perfect sanctity of the universe and its justice. Suddenly, the speed of my fall began to decrease drastically, as if the very fabric of space and time were thickening around me, forcing me to observe the action in a tortuous, hyper-slow-motion camera. The immense entity of idolatry, which floated majestically above the lake of magma, opened its gigantic jaws, revealing a dark abyss filled with obsidian teeth. Rotating like eternal grinders, the supreme monster raised its liquid mirror face in my direction, and its eyes, formed by camera lenses that wept black blood, fixed on my small, insignificant figure with a greed so ancient it chilled the blood. I could see in terrifying detail how every scale of its colossal body vibrated with anticipation, savoring the imminent destruction of my professional pride and human arrogance as it plummeted straight into its mouth. The thick, poisonous air of hell seemed to gently, yet with irresistible force, push me toward the very center of that unfathomable throat, where thousands of souls already groaned in the torment of endless spiritual digestion. The beloved comedian, still chained to his burning iron throne and being devoured by metal spiders. 1 hour, 22 minutes, 16 seconds. He raised his head with an agonizing effort to witness my imminent final doom in the abyss across the vast distance that separated us. I could see in his empty eye sockets a glimmer of macabre empathy and shared despair, realizing that we had both been devoured by the same illusion of fame. His withered body, devoid of earthly glory, shook violently, attempting to warn me with another stifled shriek, but from his mouth only more orange lava flowed, splattering the chains of molten applause that bound him. The slow, majestic movement of the greater demon's claws, preparing to seize me in midair. It was a dance of death so perfectly choreographed that it left me utterly paralyzed with awe and horror. Every second that passed in that dimension of stretched suffering allowed me to contemplate the immensity of the infernal machinery, designed millimeter by millimeter to crush human hope with truly terrifying and flawless efficiency, without room for error. The crown forged from corrupted gold that rested upon the beast's shifting head began to glow with a purple light so intense and suffocating that it threatened to blind my spiritual eyes forever. From the jewels that resembled living lenses sprouted tentacles of thick, poisonous smoke that extended like ghostly arms, attempting to entwine my limbs and hasten my descent into the pit of pure darkness. The sound of obsidian fangs scraping against each other inside the entity's mouth produced a metallic screech deafening, It made every molecule of my immaterial being vibrate with a frequency of pure panic. I could see the distorted and agonizing faces of other producers, directors, and media moguls who had idolized their own success, being slowly chewed at the bottom of that immense throat, without any hope of release. The action unfolded with such cruel and calculated parsimony that it forced me to feel the pain of imminent death 1,000 times before the beast's fangs even grazed the pristine fabric of my suit. Just at the instant when the tentacles of poisonous smoke grazed the soles of my designer shoes and the beast's ancient breath of death completely enveloped me, something completely impossible happened. It occurred from the highest point of the red, apocalyptic, and suffocating sky. There was a roar so pure and colossal that it didn't sound like infernal thunder, but like the clash of 1,000 crystal swords against an ocean of light. A crack of dazzling, immaculate white ripped across the side beside it, the vault of dark and stormy clouds, dividing the firmament of hell with the precision of a